So listen to this, 398 goals, more than Shevchenko or Batistuta, 19 trophies, more than Zidane or Ronaldinho, and at least 124 assists, more than Paul Scholes. These stats belong to Hakan Sukur, the 1997 world's top scorer, the man who took Galatasaray to Turkey's only ever UEFA Cup title, and the man who secured the World Cup medal for his country when they hadn't qualified for a tournament in 48 years. Believe it or not, in 2004, UEFA themselves named him as the greatest Turkish player of all time, but as much as it was unanimous then, now he can't even step foot in his own country. He lives in exile. He is the national team's all-time top scorer by a landslide, but now all of his assets have been seized and he splits his time between working in a bakery in California and driving an Uber. To this day, not a single player has even challenged his status as the Turkish Super League's all-time top scorer. Yet, if you go looking for him in the history books of Turkish football, you won't find his name. He's just a ghost, a whisper. These days, on the rare occasion that Sukur allows someone to interview him, he always makes sure to warn them not to get too complimentary, or they may never be allowed to travel into Turkey again. And this isn't him just being paranoid. During the 2022 World Cup, with Ziyech himself scoring an early goal, a commentator dared to mention Sukur's record for the fastest goal in the history of the tournament, and at halftime, he was forcefully removed from the broadcasts and then fired. It's clear that the goal of this operation is to make sure people forget he even existed. The stadiums that were named after him have simply been renamed. Any statues or plaques in his honor have been taken down. Even his goals have been erased from the match replays broadcasted on Galatasaray's very own channel, as well as their Netflix documentary. And if you mention him in an article, you're forced to refer to him as fugitive FATO member Hakan Sukur. This isn't just character assassination, he wasn't just cancelled. This is blatant censorship. As he said it himself, I have nothing left anywhere in the world, not even the right to explain myself. Erdogan took everything from me. All for a war that Sukur would have never been involved in if Erdogan himself hadn't brought him into it. Back in 1995, long before Erdogan became known as Turkey's tyrannical president, before Sukur had even entered his prime, he was already the country's darling, Erdogan's poster boy. The entire country dreamt of the day he'd conquer Europe. They wanted him to be the symbol of the new and improved Turkey. Little did they know this kind of pressure was something he was already familiar with. At age 10, Sukur was beaten by his father Samet until he gave up on his dream of playing basketball and instead bowed down to his wishes, joining Sakaryaspor, the club Samet himself had captained. By the age of 16, Sukur had already grown to become a 6'3" giant with the touch of a ballerina, a player truly ahead of his time, an incredibly intelligent striker who could play, make and press as much as he could score. The moment they allowed him any proper game time, Sakaryaspor just couldn't hold on to him, and once at Bursaspor, it was more of the same. The bigger the game, the better he would play, and by his second season, with Sukur's name repeatedly coming up in every national team call-up and Galatasaray looking to build a new team by bringing together the best young talents in the country, his signing was a no-brainer. But again, as wonderful as this sounds, the pressure on Sukur's signing was immense. Gala had just lost maybe the greatest player in their history, European Golden Boot winner Tanju Çolak, to their rivals Fenerbahce. That was pretty much the whole reason this rebuild was even taking place, but this matchup looked so ridiculous at the time that the first time the board of directors met Sukur, they all laughed in his face and asked the coach, "Is this the kid who's supposed to replace Tanju?" But no matter what he fought then, by the end of the season, even if Tanju had still finished as the league's top scorer, Sukur had not only almost tripled his previous season's goal-scoring tally, but added 10 assists to that, making sure that regardless of how much Tanju had scored, Gala had taken the league and cup double for the first time in 20 years. No one was laughing now. In fact, I'm sure those same board members probably felt like they had dodged a bullet, with Tanju getting a 9-year jail sentence less than a year later. Meanwhile, Sukur never took his foot off the throttle, going from one historic moment to the other, first leading Gala to come back from 2 goals down to knock Man United out of the Champions League playoffs, leading Sir Alex to claim that if we were in that same position against AC Milan, we would have won, but this Galatasaray is something else. And indeed they were, because then they took a second league title, beating Fener by just 1 point, and the next year 1 goal down against Cruyff's dream team team, Sukur scored as they came back from behind yet again. Take into consideration the fact that after 50 years of failing to get into any competition, Sukur had scored 8 goals in 7 matches to qualify Turkey to the 1996 Euros, and well, by then, it was no longer just Hakan Sukur, it was known as the Kral, the King of Turkey, the Bull of the Bosphorus. But with the country still holding on to this insecurity over the fact he had never been able to export any footballers to Europe, they decided Sukur would have to be the one to break that stigma, but there were about 3 problems with that. First, he hated the idea of living abroad. Second, he refused to leave until after he married his girlfriend. And third, she didn't want to marry him. Not even her family thought it was a good idea for her to be getting married before she finished her studies. So, what happened then was simple. Erdogan, who at the time was the mayor of Istanbul and one of his political allies, Fethullah Gulen, pulled every string they could and pressured the young girl into marrying him over summer. Even the prime minister was present at the wedding, but as the ceremony was broadcasted live on television, with Sukur smiling as he sat between those 2 men, little did he know that the conflict between them would ruin his life. A month later, the Turkish national team was sent to a training camp in Italy. All the scouts in Syria were called in to watch him, and in the end, an agreement was reached for Sukur to join Torino. For a while, all went well. Sukur even scored 6 goals in his 7 preseason matches, but once the league started, the couple began getting more and more homesick, and with the foundation of their relationship now sitting in what was little more than an arranged marriage, things between them got rough very quickly. Everyone who had sponsored this transfer began trying to keep things together, worried the whole operation would implode, at one point even being rumored to be sending him batches of Turkish food on a plane, with a newspaper writing that they do anything so that the country's spoiled son will be content. But no matter what, only 4 months after the wedding and 5 matches into the season, the couple filed for divorce, and Hakan Sukur returned to Turkey completely distraught, lamenting that, "My wife never loved me. She agreed to it as a marriage of convenience," leaving everyone to question to what degree he had been involved in Erdogan's schemes. Regardless, if you thought for a second that he let this drama affect his game any longer, you were massively wrong. After finishing out that season at Galatasaray, Sukur came back with a vengeance, and by New Year's, he was on one of the greatest streaks of all time, getting 23 goals and 6 assists in 13 matches. That sounds so absurd, I had to recheck it multiple times before I believed what I was seeing. And the funny thing is that after 4 matches without scoring, he pretty much did it again, taking the league title and finishing off the season with 54 goal contributions, 1 every 63 minutes, and only 1 goal off of beating the league's all-time goal-scoring record. In fact, he was a top scorer across every league, not just in Europe, but in the world. And though the IFFHS did hand him the world's top scorer award, when it came to the Golden Boot, a last-minute rule change made it pretty much impossible for players outside of the top 5 leagues to win it, with Ronaldo Fenomeno taking it instead. Absurdly, around that time it was even announced to the public that Sukur would be joining Super Depor, probably as a reaction to this rule change, but the deal ended up falling through, and no matter how much it hurt to miss out on a career-defining award like this, once again, he barely flinched, going back to Gal and pulling off another 47 goal contributions the next season, making it 2 league titles in a row, being invited to play for the World 11, and attracting the attention of Marcelo Lippi, who again desperately tried to get him, but the board simply did not allow it, saying it wouldn't make sense after signing Thierry Henry. Regardless, he wouldn't have to wait long. The next year, Sukur made it 3 league titles in a row, and as Gala needed an unprecedented 4th consecutive title to overtake Fenerbahce and become the most successful Turkish club in history, Sukur decided to go way beyond that. Despite starting the season by receiving the horrible news that his ex-wife had passed away in an earthquake in his hometown, at one point even being deceived by a hoax that almost convinced him his own parents had passed away as well, Sukur just never budged. Midway through the year, though he had already taken Galatasaray 11 points on top of the league and led them to yet another stunning win, beating Weaz and Shevchenko's AC Milan with another late goal, they had still been knocked out of the Champions League. But then, he decided mediocrity was no longer tolerated. At the UEFA Cup, Sukur scored against every opponent he faced all the way up till the final. Playing injured against Bologna, he still scored an incredible header for the decisive goal. Once favourites Dortmund came in their way, it was him who scored the opener. When it was time for the great Mallorca of Diego Tristà and Eto'o, he not only assisted one of his teammates, but scored twice himself. And finally, with Leeds being the only obstacle between them and the final, he again scored twice and assisted another. 27 days later, as Galatasaray faced Arsenal to become the first ever Turkish team to play in a continental final, the game ended in a goalless draw, and in the shootout, Sukur dispatched his penalty as calmly as ever, and minutes later, Galatasaray were not just European champions but treble winners, overtaking Fenerbahce's League tally and making that squad undoubtedly the greatest in the history of Turkish football, all with Sukur at the center. And with the man himself showing up yet again for his country over summer, scoring twice against Belgium to send them to the first quarterfinals in their history. Let's just say that with Lippi now at Inter and knowing Chelsea, Bayern, Milan and Roma were all after the 29-year-old, it was now or never. But once there, it really seemed Sukur was just not destined to ever leave Turkey. Only 7 matches into his time at the club, Lippi was sacked, and from there on out, things quickly worsened. Even with Ronaldo injured, there was still Recoba, Vieri, Robbie Keane and Zamorano. In fact, the squad was so stacked they sold those last 2 in the winter market, but still, even with Sukur nominated to the Ballon d'Or and their sporting director insisting he would turn out to be the transfer of the year, the fans expected Ronaldo-level performances from him, and as someone once said, you can never blame a player for not being Ronaldo. The next year, with Hector Cooper taking over, Sukur was completely outcasted from the squad, and though a 4-month stint at Parma would see him form a good partnership with Di Vaio, even taking the Coppa Italia, by the time the World Cup came around, with Turkey reaching the semi-finals and playing the greatest tournament in their history, Sukur was unrecognizable, almost letting it pass him by without leaving his mark. But thankfully, 10 seconds into their last game, the 3rd place playoff, he scored the fastest goal in the history of the World Cup, which ended up becoming his most iconic moment, so much so that people forget that day he also assisted the 2 other goals, that he was the one that secured the medal for Turkey after almost 50 years without playing in a World Cup. After the tournament, at the request of his former manager Graham Souness, Sukur gave European football one final chance joining Blackburn Rovers, but if sharing the spotlight with Andy Cole and Dwight York would already have been a problem, not only did he arrive injured, but the moment he got fit, he broke his leg in training, and then he had to get surgery for an hernia. As Souness would say, his time at the club was an absolute nightmare, and with the now 32-year-old becoming convinced he was cursed to forever play at Galatasaray, he went back one final time, and once again, suddenly, it was all good again. By New Year's, he was already on 13 goals, 3 of which against Juventus, as he led Gala to another historic win, and until the day he called it quits, things went back to normal. 85 more goals, 19 more assists, and 3 more trophies. But if his career had been tough, his retirement would be a million times worse. You see, after going through the usual route of a retired football player, opening up some restaurants, becoming a pundit and all that, Sukur, being so well connected, decided to try to get into politics. And well, as per usual, the moment Erdogan caught wind of this, he decided to make the most of it by having him join his party. And things were okay until Erdogan and Fethullah Gulen, the other man at Sukur's wedding, had a major falling out. In reality, initially, the 2 men used to be allies, defending a similar, more Eurocentric, moderately Islamic Turkey, but over time, with their shared rivals seemingly losing the battle, the 2 men's religious views strayed from one another, with Gulen considering that Erdogan was becoming more and more of an extremist, and their relationship collapsed, leading Erdogan to initially accuse Gulen of corruption, claiming that he was falsifying evidence against members of his party in order to force them out of their position so he could replace them with his followers known as the Gulenists. But as much as Gulen himself denied any involvement, over time, Erdogan's claims got more and more serious, from accusing him of wiretapping his office to going as far as claiming that he planned to overthrow the government. Regardless of who was right, sooner than later, Gulen felt forced to exile himself in the United States, and soon after, Erdogan not only forcefully shut down a network of educational institutions and media outlets that Gulen used to influence Turkish politics from afar, but ordered the persecution of any known Gulenists. And here's where Sukur comes in. Throughout the decades, though close to both, Gulen was always the one Sukur stood by, and once Erdogan began directly attacking him, Sukur left Erdogan's party in protest, leading him to be identified as a Gulenist just as they started being persecuted, forcing him to flee to the United States as well, just at the right time. Less than a year after his departure to the US, there was a nearly successful attempt to overthrow Erdogan's government, and obviously, he ended up blaming the Gulenists, taking their persecution to a whole new level with 60,000 people being swept up and declared enemies of the state, which saw not only all of Sukur's properties and bank accounts being seized, as well as a warrant for his arrest being issued to the Interpol with a red notice that meant he could be extradited back to Turkey, where he'd serve life in prison, and even worse, in his absence, his own father was put in jail, only being released years later once he was already extremely debilitated from his cancer, all just to get to Sukur. As you might imagine, it was at this point, with Erdogan seeing red, that he began trying to erase Sukur from the history books, and now this legendary man hides in plain sight in some bakery in California. As he told it himself, "One of my neighbors came by the bakery and asked me, 'Why do so many people ask to take pictures with you? You're not so handsome.' But I believe one day the light will return. Darkness doesn't last forever. And I hope today I've managed to shed some light on his story."